Hey, Michaela, how are you?
I'm doing great, Gail. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. I believe, are having a 5-year work anniversary today. Yes,
It
or
is it is coming up quickly. That five year anniversary is coming up fast, that's for sure. So kind of crazy to think about because it doesn't really feel like that long ago that I was going through the admissions process and actually applying to college. And it's kind of wild to now have been in 4 full years of reviewing and reading applications. So
absolutely.
what about for you? What year are you on here?
19. Did you have to ask?
I thought it was only fair to reciprocate.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No, I love it. So yes, I think I'm starting. Well, I just finished 19, so I'm starting my 20th year altogether in college admissions, and I'll be starting my 8th with Trinity. So I only have a couple years on you there, right?
That's fair. That's very
Yeah.
fair. Yeah. But I'm really excited to talk today kind of about what holistic admissions is all about because like I was saying, I mean, it doesn't really feel like that long ago that I was applying and this whole process felt so ambiguous. It kind of felt like there was this like giant curtain. I just wanted to peek behind and kind of find out what actually happens after I submit an application. So I'm excited to get to share kind of a little bit about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I think we try to aim for transparency here, and so these kinds of conversations are pretty helpful. I'm noticing that we have a fair number of participants already logged in,
Oh,
so I think
wonderful.
we could probably go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
As we are beginning the webinar this afternoon, I would like to very greatly encourage all of our participants to use that Q&A function to go ahead and put your questions in. If you have some now, go ahead and queue those questions up. And if there are questions as we're going through the presentation, we would encourage you to use that function too, just to ask us anything that you might want to know more about. Michaela and I have prepared a little bit of interactivity, I guess, towards the end of the conversation. So be ready to share opinions towards the end of our presentation and conversation today as well.
We're really excited to basically welcome you kind of into our admissions committee, welcoming you, I guess, into the room where it happened. If anyone's out there watching Hamilton right now. So we're excited to have you guys as a part of this presentation today. But yeah, like Gail said, my name is Michaela Nip. I'm a assistant director of admissions at Trinity, and this is the beginning of my 5th year working at Trinity. I have to admit, I'm also an alum of the institution. I graduated in 2016, but I really enjoyed being a staff member and getting to review applications and work with students through this process.
And I'm Gail Robertson. I'm starting my 8th year with Trinity and 20th altogether. I am actually not an alumna of Trinity, and I feel like I'm the one in our office that sort of stands out in that remark as well. But I guess as many would probably say, I got here as fast as I could. Can we use that reference?
Definitely. You're definitely
Perfect.
drinking the Trinity Kool-Aid now.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and dive in here. So first things first, just before we kind of dive into that activity that Gail was mentioning, we want to just kind of give a very basic overview. So as you have started this process and you're thinking about where you might be applying to college, I want to cover just the basics. How are you going to apply and when are you going to apply? So let's imagine that you have built out this incredible list of schools that you're really excited to apply to. And now you're thinking, okay, which platform might I use to apply? You're probably going to encounter these 4 application platforms: Apply Texas, Coalition, Common App, and potentially institutional applications as well. I'm not going to dive into these too much, but I think the best advice I can give is as you're building out your college list, look at what those colleges are utilizing for their application platforms. Maybe you'll find that most, if not all of the schools you're excited to apply to might be on one of those platforms. And then maybe you're only having to submit one application versus working on multiple platforms. But really quickly, Apply Texas, you're going to find that mostly in Texas, as you can see, all Texas public schools and some Texas private schools. Coalition is another application platform that is in over 150 institutions. Common App, as the name suggests, is the most common application in over 800 schools nationwide, even a handful of international schools. And finally, you might find some of those, again, institution-specific type applications.
And Michaela, when are those going to open up for students as well?
Yeah, so some of them actually have opened up around July or August 1st, depending on the institution. And so definitely be paying attention to the different schools you're applying to. Most of them have started opening up around July 1st or August 1st. That being said, just because the application is open doesn't mean you have to rush to go ahead and submit everything to these institutions, but it is important to keep that in mind that some of these institutions might already have their applications open and ready for you to start submitting materials. So now you've decided which platform you're going to use to apply to schools. The next thing you might be asking is, when do I apply? Once again, I'm not going to go too in depth here. We actually have another Learning Tuesday in the books that's going to dive into this a little bit more, but I do want to share some of these deadlines. So every institution is going to have maybe slightly different deadlines or decision plans. So these are specific to Trinity, but you're definitely going to hear some of these decision types at all institutions you're looking at. So there's early decision, which is a binding application deadline. You can only apply early decision to one institution, and you actually sign a contract saying, if you admit me, I will enroll at your school. Early action is non-binding. You can apply early action to as many schools as you would like. The difference is that you apply early and you find out early, right? And finally, we have a regular decision deadline. So this will become a little bit important later in the examples we're going to share in our activity, because the application deadline can have an impact in your application process. So that's why we wanted to mention it now, because it will come up in the examples we're going to be sharing with you guys later.
So let's dive into a little bit of the admission criteria. So this is really what we are going to start looking at and evaluating once we get a little bit further into that process. And so once we receive your materials, we really are going to be looking at the file holistically. So I want to pause there even and actually talk a little bit about that holistic process. So what is holistic review? And that is definitely us looking at and considering all aspects of the application. And it is also looking at context. And so you're going to hear us use that word a couple of times during this conversation today. It can be context of the environment when we're looking at high schools. It can be context of a family dynamic environment. It can be school changes. It can be lots of different things. So context definitely comes into play when we are looking at that holistic review process. The first main admission criteria that we're really going to be evaluating will be the academic record. And so if we are looking at that academic record, I often think about it as this really large umbrella that encompasses a lot of different type of criteria that can go into that experience. And so it is your entire 4 years of high school. So yes, we are going to be looking at your GPA. Yes, we will be looking a bit at class rank, but we are definitely also going to be considering the rigor and the academic units, which would be the types of classes that you're taking and whether you've taken that 5th year of math in taking the calculus BC class that senior year, or maybe an additional science class and so forth. We're also definitely going to be looking at trends. And so as I think Michaela would probably agree with me, we definitely would rather see someone finding their footing and certainly working their way up to see a little bit of an upward trend throughout their high school experience rather than the opposite. We definitely do not want you to be sliding down into your senior year. But also I think trends, sometimes we forget that might also be that we are naturally gifted in some areas and maybe not as gifted in others. So there are those of us who really excel in foreign languages or really excel in mathematics, but perhaps that same person does not necessarily perform to that same degree in an English course or in a science class. And so definitely looking at all of the context and the trends there within that experience. We are going to be looking at the high school as well. And so I think a lot of times students want to know about whether or not we will be reviewing the competitiveness of their high school or perhaps what their high school actually offers for them. Some high schools will offer AP classes, some will offer IB, some will offer dual credit, some offer all three. And we certainly are putting the student within the context of their environment because we cannot expect a student to actually have taken a class if that class is not offered. So I think that tends to be a big part of the review process as well. The second thing that we typically look at will be testing. And this is a major conversation, I would say, across colleges and universities this year. As many universities have, Trinity has also gone test optional for the next 3 years. So one of the questions that I would encourage you to ask about your institutions that you are considering is whether a test score, either SAT or ACT, is optional or required. You will want to know whether you're needing to take one of the test scores in order for your application file to be complete. Generally speaking, the middle 50% range, so this is really that middle average of test scores for a particular institution, so the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. This is a range in which you can ask a school to really see if your test scores might be in that middle, or if they maybe are outside of those averages on either side, a bit on the higher side, or maybe just a bit underneath as well. But that's generally, I would say, a comfort level for many institutions. Definitely ask about super scoring as well. So for Trinity, we will actually super score either an SAT or an ACT. So for the SAT, we will reach across different test dates for that highest combined score. And for the ACT, we will reach across different test dates for that highest composite score. So we will average those 4 subsections out as well. So that really gives students the benefit of the doubt that if they perhaps did exceptionally well in October on one exam and exceptionally well in September on another part of the exam, we actually are looking at those 2 best of the best. We also are going to actually take self-reported testing. So we will allow students to let us know what their test scores and test dates are, rather than having them submit official test scores from either ACT or College Board. And so that allows them to really apply to institutions without having to pay for test scores to be sent to us as well. So I think many times those are some of the objective criteria that can come into a holistic review. Moving forward into a little bit more of the essay side of things, and this is actually one of my favorite parts of the application. I'm not sure, Michaela, if it is yours as well, and I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about that essay and what it means to you.
Definitely. So we've moved from kind of some of the more objective criteria we're looking at into some of the more subjective criteria that we're also looking at in this review process. I think sometimes this process doesn't feel incredibly human. Like there's not a very human element to it, that maybe there's a robot on the other side just running calculations, but there's actually humans on the other side. Both Gail and myself read applications and we read them cover to cover. And I think we both get really excited about the essay because it is giving us a little bit of that human side of the student whose application we're reviewing. We're getting to hear their voice sometimes for the first time because maybe we've never met them before, right? We're getting to learn something about them that we can't find really anywhere else in the application. And so yes, in the essay, we are looking for writing ability, but also we're looking to just learn about a student and get a sense of their character, their personality. And I think when it comes to the committee process, that can become very powerful because all of a sudden you feel like you know that student just a little bit better and therefore can even better advocate for them in this process because you've learned more about them, you've gotten to hear their voice. It's a little bit more of that human side of it that I think really makes an application come to life within the essay portion. Now, the essay doesn't often make or break an application, right? But it can definitely have an impact in our ability to get to know the student whose application we're reviewing. Another more subjective piece of this puzzle is going to be extracurricular activities. There's a section within the application that you submit that allows you to really address all of the different activities you've done outside of the classroom. And I have to highlight that this looks very different for every single student. For some students, it might be a sport they've been involved in for a very long time, or maybe it's that they've been in band or theater throughout their entire high school experience. But it might also look a little different. Maybe it's that you have responsibilities at home, like taking care of a little sibling when school hours are over, or taking on a couple of jobs to help support your family, right? It's going to look very different for every student. So for us, it's just that additional context of what are you doing outside of the classroom, giving us that indication of how will you fit into our campus community. Our community is incredibly vibrant, and our students are close-knit, they're very involved. And so we like to see, okay, could we see you fitting and thriving into our campus community? And we often get a sense of that through the co-curricular involvement that students have. And here we're definitely looking more for depth than breadth, right? It's definitely exciting to see a student being really involved in a particular area, maybe even taking on leadership or growing in a certain area, not necessarily having been involved in every single club or organization available to them. So Gail mentioned earlier that context piece. I think this just provides that additional level of context. And like I mentioned before, allows us to get to know our students even just a little bit better.
Michaela, with regard to the extracurricular activities as well, I think that we have to mention COVID-19 and how those may have changed for students. Can you talk a little bit about expectations as well that we may have for students during this time period?
That's a wonderful point, Gail. I'm really glad you brought that up. We completely and fully understand that the current situation with COVID has meant that many students have not been able to participate in some of their activities that they've been maybe participating in for a long time. We fully understand. And in fact, in the application platforms, there will oftentimes be an opportunity to provide additional context. And that will be a great opportunity to share, okay, you might have seen there's a little bit of gap in involvement here, and this is why. That is totally fine. We're not going to penalize a student because they weren't able to be involved in an activity that was canceled or unable to continue because of COVID. It could also be a really great opportunity to share maybe something else that you were able to do during COVID. Maybe you picked up a new hobby or got really excited about a new project, or maybe you were using that time in a different way. Maybe you were working throughout COVID, right? Whatever you might be able to provide in terms of that context is really helpful. So we have not expected students to have continued on as normal because we realize these are not normal circumstances. So Gail, I think that's a great point.
Back to that context too, right? So the next thing that we tend to look at will be recommendations. And at Trinity, we do require both a counselor recommendation as well as a teacher recommendation. You may encounter schools that actually require one or the other, and sometimes neither. The counselor recommendation to us really does provide a little bit more of an overarching idea of maybe how you fit into the school environment, if you have taken full advantage of the courses required and offered, and so forth. I think sometimes in counselor recommendations, we definitely get to have a little bit of insight into maybe your involvement in and out of the classroom, or definitely a little bit more on the character side of things. And sometimes counselors maybe don't know students well enough, especially depending on their course, on their caseload. Teachers, on the other hand, we tend to see a little bit more insight into maybe who you are in the classroom and what growth you may have shown over a period of time. I think a lot of students are wonder who they should ask for their teacher recommendation. Generally speaking, I would say probably someone who has had you in your junior or senior year, although there are always exceptions to that. I would also say typically someone who has had you in an academic core course, which would be your English, math, science, social science, or foreign language classes. But sometimes that student council advisor has seen you all 4 years, and you really want to use that particular teacher, and that is okay too. So you do have a little bit of variability there. The last piece of criteria that I'm really wanting to explore is that idea of engagement today. And I think that is typically demonstrated a little bit more by an interview or by a campus visit, but there are a lot of opportunities for you to interact and engage with the institution. There's a couple of reasons why we do consider this when we're looking into the evaluation process. First of all, we do want to see that you're interested in us. I would hope, just like you want to see that we are interested in you, there's definitely a reciprocation there. I think more importantly, having an interview or conducting a visit really allows you to determine if we're going to be a good fit for what you are wanting from your college experience. We want you to be making a 4-year decision, and what better way to figure out, the answer to that question rather than a campus visit, truly. And so we want to make sure that you can see yourself on campus for all 4 years, because we do want to admit graduates to Trinity and not just incoming first-year students. I think an interview in particular can be a great opportunity to offer additional information, and this might be an opportunity to really talk about some of those successes that you've had, or explain some of the hiccups that you've had within your high school experience as well. So it's a great way for us to be able to talk through some of those things that we may see in an application later on. I often think for both Michaela and I'll speak for both of us, we really like to see our students as people, right? And not just these application files. And so in addition to the essay, I think the interview can be a great opportunity where we can see you face to face. We would certainly love to do that in person. Right now it is virtual, but we can have our cup of coffee and still see each other face to face, even if there's a computer screen between us as well. So certainly either virtual or in person would be considered that engagement piece right now as well.
And Gail, I can definitely echo that for sure, especially in the committee setting in particular, how a counselor is able to advocate for one of their applicants once they've met them for an interview is just very different. You can hear the excitement. They're able to speak so much more outside of just what they've been able to see in the application because they've learned so much more through that interview. So I completely echo everything you just said there. Awesome. So now we're going to welcome you guys into our admissions committee. We're going to put on our admissions counselor hats now. And I do want to set the scene just a little bit to kind of welcome you guys to our committee. So the way it works for us is that all 12 admissions counselors actually will meet in our library in the bottom floor. It's kind of dark in there. There's a huge table. We meet pretty much all day and we have tons of snacks and caffeine and we just chat. We share our applicants and their files and we vote and make decisions. It's important to know that when a file gets to committee, it has already been read a couple of times. And the way we divide up applications and how they're reviewed is regionally. So for example, I am actually a counselor who oversees the Austin area. So I'm oftentimes the first reader on applicants coming from the Austin area. So I'm the first person to read them. I know the schools there really well. I know the counselors really well. So I'm normally the first to review a application from Austin. Another counselor will get their eyes on it as well. And then it's going to be in the committee room. I think it's really important to know that in committee, we're considering both those objective and subjective elements that Gail and I talked about, and that when we are making decisions, the decisions are based off of the application, right? Not based off of the person or the applicant, but the application itself. And do we feel like the information presented in the application gives us confidence that the student will be successful in our environment here at Trinity? The other aspect I think is important to note is that in a committee setting, we are also considering institutional goals and institutional initiatives and things like that. And I think that's great to know that every school has different goals that they're working towards and different directives they've been given. And so that could come up as part of the committee process as well. So, for example, we're going to be sharing with you guys actually 4 different applicants that are in our committee, and we are trying to see if they'll be a good fit for our university. So this is our profile to kind of give you an idea of where we're at academically and who might be a good fit within this environment. So for our university, it's urban, it's in San Antonio, Texas. We have a focus on the liberal arts and sciences, but also offer pre-professional programs. So if a student's looking for those things, that might be a good fit. We have an emphasis on research, internships, campus life, and study abroad. Our student to faculty ratio is about 9:1, average class size 19 students. So we might be looking for a student who would thrive in a smaller setting like that. We represent 47 states, 63 countries, 8% of our students coming in internationally as well. We do have quite a few students from Texas though. And so if we see an application that comes from outside of Texas, that might be kind of exciting to us in the committee. We are an NCAA Division III institution. And so if a student is applying and they're excited to be a part of one of our athletic programs, that might be something that's taken into consideration. In terms of some of that more objective information, our average GPA is a 3.73 unweighted, and that is a core recalculated GPA, just using those academic solid courses that Gail mentioned before. In terms of testing, and again, that middle 50% that Gail referenced earlier, our middle 50% for the ACT is a 30 to a 33. For the SAT, it's a 1330 to a 1470. Something to keep in mind as we pull those applicants up in just a moment. And our admit rate was 29%. So unfortunately, that means we're not going to be able to admit every single student that we're about to review together. Now, right before we dive into these students and who we're going to be reviewing, I do want to walk you through what your options are going to be. So Gail and I are going to share with you a file, and we're going to kind of talk through what a committee might look like in terms of presenting a file, asking questions about a file, and then we're going to allow you, the admissions committee, to vote your decision. And you'll have the opportunity to vote on each applicant a decision of admit, waitlist, or deny. So I want to walk through those just really quickly. Admit means that a student has been offered a spot in the class, and that is reserved until May 1st. So in terms of all the information they've provided, we know they're going to be really successful in our environment. They're meeting all of that kind of criteria, both more the objective and subjective, and we know they're going to be really successful at Trinity. A waitlist option. This might be when the application is admissible, but maybe there's really not enough room in the class right now, or we feel like we might need a little bit more information before we're able to offer a spot in the class. That might be a great opportunity for a waitlist. And deny. This is an opportunity or a decision for when an application does not support predicted success in our environment. So maybe there's something within that application that gives us pause that that applicant would be successful in the environment that Trinity has to offer. So those are going to be your 3 options when you're voting on these next applicants we're going to share with you guys.
Okay, Michaela, here we come to the good stuff. So as you mentioned, we've got 4 files or 4 students' applications that we're going to be reviewing in the next couple of minutes. Just for our participants in the webinar today, after each application, we are actually going to be sharing a poll with you. And so you are going to be our admission committee to vote whether the applicant should be admitted, waitlisted, or unfortunately denied. And so after each applicant review and conversation, we're going to be sharing that poll. You go ahead and log in your vote to make that decision on each of these files. So our first applicant of the evening is Riley Adams. And Riley attends Small Town High School, which is in Township, Pennsylvania. So he is an out-of-state applicant for us. And it's obviously a little bit tough to visit San Antonio, Texas from Pennsylvania. So it is a little bit harder for him to have that engagement, at least in an on-campus sense. He's applying early action, which means he has turned in his application early, but is not making the early commitment to us. And the first thing that I want to do is really look at his grades. And so, Michaela, you may notice that we have some asterisks in that 11th grade year, and I want to explain why his transcript looks a little bit different. The asterisks actually denote that he is taking dual credit classes, so the asterisks are indeed advanced coursework. The P's in 11th grade year is because his particular school actually went to a pass-fail system for that last semester due to remote learning. And so when we are recalculating his GPA, we are certainly looking at his letter grades from previous years, but we are not calculating those passes into our GPA system. He is indeed taking a 4th year of English. He is not taking a math this year. He is taking a 4th year of science and also a 4th year of history. And he's an AB student. He's got a 3.5 GPA with 4 dual credit classes. 6 are offered at the school. So I'm going to say he's really taking advantage of the curriculum that's offered to him. He did apply with test scores, and so he has a 31 on the ACT, and that is his super score. And he's got an interest in biology, probably a little more on the pre-med side of things. So his essay was actually a really sweet essay. It was solid. So it was well written, and it was about his interest in medicine, but it was really his reflection about his grandfather's illness and unfortunate subsequent death, and how that really solidified for Riley his interest in medicine. And so that's sort of the path that he has decided to take. He is involved in quite a few extracurricular activities. And so he's involved in HOSA, which I know, Michaela, you're familiar with HOSA. It's the Health Occupations Organization for students that are thinking about pre-med. So he's had some clinical rotations and some like hands-on work, which has been really nice for him. He's also FFA president, which I thought was kind of cool. Being in a large city, we don't necessarily always see a bunch of FFA students. And so having a little bit more of that experience has been fun. And he actually has some pretty I would say strong responsibilities within his own family dynamic. They live on a farm, and he actually very much helps around. I think they have sheep, and he does a lot of I guess fence fixing throughout the summer. He talked a little bit about that as well. And he also runs varsity track, and he's a great track student as well. The council recommendation was pretty brief, and I am actually not reading that in brevity due to Riley. I'm reading that as brevity just in that the counselor did mention that she does not write a lot of recommendations, and so it may not have necessarily been in her nature to have written something a little bit longer. But the science teacher wrote a recommendation. It's also his HOSA teacher, and it was very strong. She actually mentioned that while Riley may not necessarily be naturally gifted in the areas of science, he works extremely hard and he puts in the effort. So I love seeing this like grit and determination about him. He did a virtual interview. So again, out-of-state student, I'm happy with the virtual interview here. It is tough to get to campus, and especially right now. So he hasn't had a campus visit, and he is being recruited by our track coach as well. So overall, just to summarize, GPA, pretty much within that middle area for us as well. Testing within that middle 50%, and overall, pretty strong student. Are there any questions that I can answer for you, Michaela, before we vote as a committee?
Yes, Gail, I have a couple of questions. First of all, I really like that while Riley's looking for biology and pre-med, that they've also taken advantage of advanced classes in other areas outside of that interest. I see advanced courses in English and history, which I think is awesome. I do wonder though about him not having taken a math course in senior year. That might be a little bit of a jump once they get to Trinity, right? It's going to be a little bit surprising going from not having taken a math class to maybe calculus, right? So I have a little bit of concern about that. Do you have a similar concern there?
Yeah, good catch. I knew you would notice that. So without that math class in that fourth year, there's definitely, I would say, a slight concern. We typically like to see calculus in that senior year for students that are thinking pre-med. But you know, we do have that Math Bridge program as well that is specifically designated for students who may not have had calculus that are interested in STEM fields. And so I don't hesitate that again, with his work ethic, I think he can catch up. I think he'll be able to do the work.
I think he's bringing a lot of great things to the table here for sure.
Absolutely. So I am opening up the voting on Riley. So I would love to invite all of our participants to cast their vote, and I'll give another 10 or 15 seconds here. We've got a speedy committee today, right? And it looks like the majority of our participants are logging in. It looks pretty close to a solid decision here. It looks like most of us are voting admit. Would you actually agree with this decision?
Yeah, I would completely agree with this decision. I mean, the student has a lot of the strong objective information we're looking for in terms of testing and GPA and taking advantage of the challenging courses that are offered out of school. That's all wonderful. But on top of that, the variety of things he's bringing to the table that are kind of unique and different, and that work ethic, and the fact that they reached out and did a virtual interview all the way from their small town high school, right? That's really exciting. So I completely agree with this decision.
Absolutely. Well, let's get to our next candidate.
Perfect. All right, so here we have Olivia Lee. So Olivia Lee attends Big Public High School in Plano, Texas, and has applied regular decisions. That's our final application deadline there that we offer. This student, if you look at her transcript here, has not taken any advanced classes. So as Gail mentioned before, the little asterisks indicate an advanced course. I'm not seeing any asterisks just on a first glance at this transcript here. And when I go over and look at the rigor and the context of the high school, this high school is actually offering 18 APs. And this student hasn't taken advantage of any of those just yet. So I might be a little concerned about their transition to a challenging environment that we have, considering they haven't really taken advantage of those challenging courses in high school. But her GPA has been fine. She has a 3.23. I do see one C on her transcript, but mostly A's and B's other than that. In terms of testing, she has submitted her ACT score, and that is a 27 on the ACT. So just right outside of our middle 50% there. In terms of her academic interest, she's thinking communication, which I think is fun because our communications program is really strong. Students are creating their own TV shows and radio stations. So I'm excited to see that she is interested in an area that we actually offer that's really strong. In terms of the other parts of the application, her essay, it was fine. The essay was about a mission trip that she'd been on and how it helped her realize her own privilege. Everything about it was written fine. It just didn't really blow me away. I don't feel like I really learned a whole lot about Olivia through her essay. And it also kind of reminded me of many other essays I've read that seem pretty similar in terms of the topic. So the essay was fine. There was no red flags, but also didn't blow me away. In terms of co-curricular involvement, Olivia is involved in PALS, so that is a peer leadership type organization in high school. Also involved in yearbook, and she babysits. So she's involved in a few different things here. But what I did notice is she hasn't taken on any leadership roles in those organizations. She's been a part of them, but doesn't have actually any leadership within those groups in terms of president, VP, or taking on any other type of role. In terms of her recommendations, the counselor rec was positive. It was actually really great to read. It spoke a lot about her character and how she's really lovely, very sweet, very bubbly personality. but it didn't really talk a lot about her academics. I didn't really get that side of her from this letter. And it was kind of the same for the teacher recommendation. It was really positive. They really like Olivia. They think she's a really fantastic person. I just didn't get any insight there into her academics and what that might look like for her. And I was kind of hoping to see that because, as you might see over on her transcript, I don't have any information about what's going on in 12th grade. I don't know what types of courses she's taking or anything like that. And so I was kind of hoping to get a glimmer of that in the letters of recommendation, but I did not. And finally, she's not been engaging with us, which is a little surprising because I know that we definitely been reaching out about virtual interviews and things like that, and we haven't seen her take advantage of those just yet. Gail, do you have any questions for me about this applicant?
Yeah, I'm going to echo the concern about not knowing her 12th grade coursework yet. And so when was the last time perhaps that you reached out to her? Have you reached out to her specifically, or has she just been getting kind of typical communication flow from us?
That's a great question. So I actually did reach out to Olivia just because I noticed we didn't have that information from 12th grade and I just kind of wanted to get a little bit more. So I sent her a quick email. I haven't heard back yet, but I'm hopeful that I'll get to hear back soon so I can just get a little bit more of that context about what's going on in 12th grade. You know, maybe she is taking APs this year. I just don't know because it hasn't been given to me in her application.
It does concern me, and certainly I think sometimes we see students that fall into this unfortunate experience that we don't always receive their 12th grade classes or coursework on the transcript. Sometimes it is just the grades that have been completed and don't have the classes listed in progress. So that's a real miss. And certainly with her GPA and testing being outside of that middle average for us and not knowing if she's taking APs, I feel like there's not a lot of information to go on here.
Exactly. I have quite a few questions, I think, about some of the information that I've seen and also hopeful that I'll get some additional information so that I can make a more informed decision.
Absolutely. Shall we go ahead and see how we feel about Olivia? And it looks like many of our participants are logging in. I'll give you another 5-8 seconds to vote here. Again, another quick committee. Okay, and let me share the results here. So it actually looks like our participants today are feeling kind of maybe not quite so positive about Olivia here. Can you talk through maybe that wait list to deny decision and maybe where you would actually lean on this particular candidate?
I think that's great. I definitely can understand where the committee is coming from here. I think personally, I was leaning a little bit more towards a wait list on this student because there weren't any glaring red flags, if that makes sense. The student's testing was average and their GPA was fine. The grades were fine. I think for me, I just needed a little bit more information. The average was, the application felt very average to me. And I also felt like I was maybe missing information that might have actually been really beneficial for the student. There are things that Olivia could have done. She could have done an interview or responded to my email or could have just provided some additional context that actually might have changed the scales for us. So that's why I think I could see a wait list, because maybe if room did open up in the class and we did get additional information, that might change how the committee is viewing this particular applicant.
I think you bring up a great point too with waitlist is that if a student does receive a waitlist decision, that does not mean you should stop communicating with the college. That means you should advance further into communicating with the college and make sure that they have all of the information that they need to make a solid decision and to express that interest as well. And so I would actually agree with that waitlist. If Olivia had been an early action applicant, I might have even, thought about that waitlist or defer option as well. Shall we move to our next student?
Sure.
All right, so our next student is Trey Garza, and he goes to all boys prep school, which we know pretty well in Little Rock, Arkansas. He has also applied regular decision, and so he has not necessarily gone an early route. He waited just a little while to submit his application. I want to concentrate on his transcript for just a second because you may see a couple of grades on here that you're questioning already. Certainly in 9th grade, mostly A's with a C in science. 10th grade, we see an F in history, and that is kind of glaring to me as standing out that it looks unusual amongst the other grades. And then we're looking at B's and C's in 11th grade. He is indeed taking 6 APs altogether, both in 11th and 12th grade. And one of the things that's interesting about all boys prep is that they actually limit the number of AP classes that a student can take. So typically they only allow students to take 2 APs every year. And so Trey actually had to get special permission to take additional APs in that senior year. His overall GPA for us recalculates to a 2.93. So that is obviously a concern. Test scores, though, he has done very well. So he submitted both the SAT and the ACT. He has a 35 on the ACT and a 1550 on the SAT. And he is interested in political science. And just a quick note, too, about All Boys Prep School. It's a really competitive institution. So it is a school that we have seen quite a few applications from, and the students are well prepared when they do graduate. Trey's essay was solid. It was about, and you're gonna laugh at me here, crushing his opponents in his debate tournament. And so, you know, you could see a little bit of Trey's personality, I think, through the essay. One of the concerns was that he was really, conscientious about crushing them and not necessarily uplifting his opponents. And so I know that being a little bit of a collaborative environment, I think that he is very competitive, certainly within kind of the debate realm as well. His extracurriculars have been very focused. So he is actually a nationally ranked debater, and he's actually also a nationally ranked hacky sacker. So if you need some good tips on hacky sack skills, Michaela, I would highly encourage you to check out his YouTube channel. He might, you know, get you into it. His recommendations were both from the counselor and the teacher. So the counselor actually talked a little bit about this grade that I mentioned to you earlier in 10th grade, the F in history. I was really disappointed that the counselor mentioned this instance of academic dishonesty, and Trey did not mention it in his application. And so that is always a red flag to me, that this was a great opportunity for Trey to be able to explain this experience and hopefully the growth from the experience within his own application, though he chose not to. So we did find out about it through the counselor recommendation, which was unfortunate. The counselor did say that it was a one-time instance, but did not provide a lot of other details beyond that. His teacher recommendation did talk a little bit about a lack of focus when Trey is not interested in the subject matter. And so he is very interested in history and a little more on the English side of things, you know, certainly with a political science interest, maybe not quite so much with math and science. Trey did visit campus, and this was actually before campus closed due to COVID. And so we saw a visit from him actually back in February. He came to one of the Trinity and Focus programs, and he has not done an interview. And so I have not had the opportunity to talk with him about the academic dishonesty either. And so that's sort of where we're sitting right now with Trey's application. Any questions perhaps about his file and application?
I do wonder, Gail, do you know if the student might be recruited by our debate team? I know we have a really strong debate program, and I see that he's nationally ranked in debate. Do we know if he's being looked at by our debate coaches?
Actually, I don't know if Trey has submitted his materials in time. And so, as you know, Trey would need to have contacted the debate coach by February 1st, and that hasn't happened. So unfortunately, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm also a little concerned. I mean, looking at the transcript, the F is definitely glaring and surprising, but I still see a slight downward trend going from A's mostly to B's to more C's. So I'm also seeing a little bit of a downward trend here. And yeah, the academic dishonesty is a little concerning as well, especially since we have such a strict honor code at Trinity. And I wish that he would have been able to disclose that to you personally, maybe in an interview.
Absolutely. It would have been helpful context, right, for his application. Well, I see that we have folks are logging in to vote here. It looks like quite a few have already voted. Let me give just another second or two to have any last minute votes in here. Okay. And if we look at the shared results, Trey unfortunately did not fare very well. And I do think that I would agree with the committee decision on this one. I think certainly he has some outstanding talents within debate and within some of his coursework. I don't know, with us being a liberal arts institution where we are really going to encourage that involvement in all subjects and areas, and certainly a little bit more of that collaborative feel, I would also be concerned about Trey's fit within the institution. Shall we head to our next candidate?
All right, so our final candidate we're going to discuss with you guys today is Shauna Jackson, who's coming from Charter High School in Houston, Texas. So this is a school that I know Gail visits every single year, so Gail's super familiar with Charter High School. So let's look first at Shauna's GPA. She has incredibly strong grades, as you can see, pretty much all A's except for one B in English in 11th grade, but her GPA ends up being a 3.94. The school that she's currently at offers 12 APs, and she's actually taken 7 of them. So she's taken advantage of quite a few, and you can see those indicated with asterisks here. I can also see that she's had a really strong start to her 12th grade year. So those strong grades have really kind of continued throughout her high school experience. She did apply to Trinity test optional. So we do not have test scores on file for Shauna, but that is okay because we are test optional, and we're not making any assumptions about why the student didn't submit test scores. It might be that the test dates weren't available. It could be that the test scores weren't up to their standards, but I'm not going to make any assumptions about that. It's just one piece of information we will not have to consider in this application. In terms of academic interest, Shauna's a little undecided right now, has a few different things she's excited about, but hasn't really pinpointed it, which again, I'm okay with because we don't do program-based admissions and students have until sophomore year to actually sign away into a major. So I feel like that's okay that she's still kind of unsure and excited about a lot of different areas. Her essay was really powerful. It was an excellent essay. It was very moving. It talked a lot about her family and the family structure. And unfortunately, she was homeless in 9th grade, ended up living with relatives in 10th grade, and finally moved in with her sister in 11th and 12th grade. And even though that was really heartbreaking, her essay was ultimately about learning to trust others and building resiliency. So I was really impressed by that grit that I saw in that essay. In terms of co-curricular involvement, she worked about 20 hours every week, and she mentioned she needed to do that to support her and her sister as they were living together. So she was definitely working a lot while taking these AP courses. So I'm really amazed that she was able to balance that. She's also involved with a CBO, or a community-based organization that works with students, helping them apply to college and figure out what college options are available to them. And what I thought was really interesting is that Shauna actually started an all-female robotics team at her school, which is pretty cool. In terms of recommendations, they were just glowing, both from the counselor and the teacher. They spoke a lot about her time management, which I saw through the application that kind of kept popping up, but her work ethic as well, and how she worked really hard and also motivated others to work hard too. She wanted to bring others up with her, which I thought was really amazing to see. In terms of engagement, she did actually come and visit campus about a year ago with her CBO. The CBO actually brought their group of students over, and she's also done an in-person interview. And I can say it was a really strong interview. I got to know her really well in that, and I think that she could be a really strong fit. Gail, do you have any questions for me about Shauna?
Okay, Michaela, I can tell you that you like Shauna. And I have to echo that I love the persistence, the fact that she has, I think you also mentioned, changed schools with each of these changes within her family structure. Is that correct?
So yeah, she did actually move schools, and I forgot to mention that. So she did move schools from 9th grade and in 10th grade, but has been at the same school since she moved in with her sister. So 11th and 12th have been at Charter High School.
I just think that in itself is a real testament to her maybe flexibility and persistence as well, that she has been through not one transition in high school, but 3 transitions in high school to new schools and different environments. And we're not necessarily seeing a dip in grades. And we're also seeing quite a bit of leadership and involvement here. And so to really be able to come into a new school in 11th grade and start a robotics team in the same year, I think is probably a testament to her own grit, right?
Definitely. And she's able to talk about that a little in her interview as well. And that's why she was joking about that B in English, that stinky little B. But that was because the transition to her new school was a little challenging, but she was able to reach out and get help and really be successful in that new environment.
Mm-hmm. I think I don't know if I have any other questions at this point. Shall we see how our committee
Let's see
votes?
how the committee feels.
Yes. All right, the votes are coming in. Oh, Michaela, we may have a unanimous decision here. Let's see what happens. We're close. Give just a couple more seconds. Okay, so let me share the results. So evidently, you all felt very similar to how we felt about Shauna and her experience in high school as well. So we'll see that Shauna is indeed being offered a place in the class, and as an early decision student, we're really eager to go ahead and have her become a Tiger next year. So I think at this point, we actually want to back away a little bit from the example applications and really be able to answer some of your questions. We've had some great questions come in the chat already, and I would encourage all of you that might still have a few questions that we have not yet answered to add those to the chat as well. I'm going to start with a kind of an overarching basic question here, Michaela, and that is, how can a student stand out in their application?
Awesome. I think that's a really great question to ask. And I think we kind of saw that come up in a couple of these examples, right? I would say one of the biggest ones is definitely going to have to be that interview. I think the moment that you get to be face to face with an admissions counselor and you become more than just a name or a number on a page, but become a human, you immediately will start to stand out. And I kind of mentioned that earlier, that how counselors are able to advocate for a student once they've met with them and how that makes a really big difference. I will say that is really true. And so I would say that's one way that you can definitely stand out in an application. I will also say, and you probably saw this with Shauna, we didn't dive into it too much, but early decision is another way to really stand out. Early decision, I mentioned, is a binding agreement. So when students say, hey, I want to be at your school, it's really hard to ignore that. I mean, we're looking at you in a much smaller applicant pool, so you're really able to distinguish yourself there. So that's just a couple of ways. Gail, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think I would certainly echo that sentiment as well. I think the one thing that I would say, typically with the essay, students do stress out a little bit about what to write about, to make myself stand out and distinguish myself in the pool. And I will say it's less important for you to sound unique and more important for you to sound authentic. And so I'll go for authentic any day. And so, really showcasing who you are within the application process as well. We had a question about teacher recommendations as well, particularly asking teachers for recommendations that may be your senior year teacher, and that being a little bit late in the process and perhaps they don't know you quite as well. I would say that if you were concerned about that, you can also ask two teachers to write recommendations. And so if you were wanting to have a senior year perspective and then also a junior year perspective, you're certainly happy, and we're happy to receive both of those. I do think that having a teacher who knows you well probably trumps having the correct subject matter represented within your teacher recommendation, if that makes sense. So I would much rather opt for a bit more of a character recommendation and someone who can very honestly talk about your participation within a classroom environment rather than having a particular subject at hand as well. We had a question about leadership roles as well, and maybe not necessarily having leadership positions, but still showing leadership on extracurricular activities. Can you talk just a little bit more about other ways to show leadership within extracurricular activities?
Definitely. So I think it kind of goes to the depth question, right? So you might not have taken on actual leadership position, and that could be for many reasons. Maybe it's very competitive. Maybe a lot of people are trying to be president, VP, or any of the other positions that might be available. It could also be that you've got other things going on too, right? And so that might make it challenging to take it on. But when I see that a student has been involved in depth in a certain organization, or maybe they've been working a position for a certain amount of time, right? Those are other ways to really show leadership, right? Also, I've sometimes seen students create their own clubs. I think that in and of itself feels like leadership, to take that initiative and to start your own club at an organization or at a school. That's really exciting to see. But I think it's not just if a student doesn't have leadership, I'm concerned, right? That's definitely not how I look at it, especially if a student has depth in something, in an area that they're really excited about, that they've been involved in or invested in for a long period of time. That to me still shows leadership skills, but also commitment skills and persistence. So those are those other things that I'm seeing as well.
We had some really excellent questions about early action, and in particular with reference to Olivia's file, and maybe not necessarily having the same amount of information, especially with academic course load and grades and those kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit about either the advantages or disadvantages that a student may face applying early action versus regular decision, especially if they are wanting to show additional coursework?
That is an excellent question, and it's one that we get fielded quite often. So typically my rule of thumb and what I like to advise students is to apply early if you can. First of all, it's at the very beginning of the admissions process. The number of spots that we have available for students is higher. And you'll see this trend probably at many schools, but I can say it's true at Trinity as well. Our acceptance rate in early action is higher than it is in regular decision. And so that's something to consider. But I definitely do understand the concerns of, well, how am I supposed to demonstrate additional coursework? Like maybe junior year was kind of rough for me, and so I really do want to send in my senior year grades, at least that first semester, to show that growth. And honestly, what I would recommend is still consider applying early action and let the committee decide if they need additional information. So in early action, an option for a student or a decision that could be released is something we call a defer. So defer is not a wait list and it is not a deny. It's a hold on, we need a little bit more information and we'll consider you again at our next application round. And actually that opportunity ends up being really wonderful for some students because it allows them the opportunity to send us the additional information that we feel we need to make an informed decision just by holding off on it. But it allows us as a committee to make that decision. We might feel actually that we have just enough information to make a decision in early action, and then the defer option would give us that opportunity to then seek additional information if we think it might be necessary. Gail, would you agree with that?
I would. I think that that's spot on. So I think it really, you know, we really do kind of place the decision on the student making that best option for themselves as well. We had a couple of questions come in about interviews, and so I wanted to address those a little bit more broadly as well. So as we have stated a couple of times, I think tonight, yes, we encourage interviews, and virtual interviews are great right now. We do offer virtual interview signups on the Trinity website, so trinity.edu, or alternatively, you are welcome to email either Michaela or myself, and our email addresses are up on the screen still. So please feel free to utilize us, and we will make sure that we connect you with a correct counselor for your geographic region as well. But I think that with interviews, really we tend to see them as 30-minute, and I'll say casual conversations, and that we are not expecting formality with our interviews, especially now that we're in Zoom calls. And so, you know, you are welcome to wear your flip-flops and shorts. We won't even notice. But I think with interviews, it does allow us a chance to explore a little bit more about what your experience has been at your high school, what has worked well for you, what hasn't worked well for you. I think particularly now, I'm very interested in maybe how you responded to the changing academic environment going into remote learning, what maybe was unexpectedly worked for you, and maybe what was the challenge. How has your family structure perhaps changed since all of this as well? And so it really allows us to explore some of those things. Most importantly, though, it allows for you to ask us questions, especially regarding admission questions and scholarships and financial aid and programs and majors. We do not expect students to come to interviews with a prepared resume. You certainly can, but that is not necessarily required by any means. We will obviously gather that information as part of your application, though we will ask about your extracurricular activities. I would say that being prepared for an interview, come with a couple of questions. You know, we definitely want to help you assess whether this is going to be a good fit. So really think about some of those questions that might be important to you within your college search and how we can best handle that. Let's see, one other, I think actually we just have time for maybe one other question as well. We had a couple of questions about early decision. So I think we'll probably end on just the general question about early decision. Michaela, what are the advantages to early decision? And then also, what is the size of that particular pool? I think would address some of these questions asked.
That's a really great question. And I definitely think when we're advising families, early decision is not something we advise lightly. We want to make sure it's a decision that the student is really excited about, that they found the perfect fit for them. It makes sense for them academically, socially, financially. It's checking all the boxes. They found the right place for them. And if that's the case, then we might say, hey, have you considered early decision? Because there are advantages with it. You do get to distinguish yourself in a smaller pool. So last year, our applicant pool was about 300 for early decision compared to roughly 4,000 in early action and 5,000 in regular decision. And so it definitely was a smaller pool. So you were able to really distinguish yourself because just the numbers, right? It made sense that way. And so with that, we also did see higher rates of acceptance with early decision. So that's another benefit, I guess you could say, through an early decision application. And then what was the other side of that question, Gail? I'm so sorry.
No, actually, just sort of the benefits of early decision and the size of the pool.
Okay, great. I think I checked both of those. Checked both of those boxes, and I was like, I think I'm missing a third thing there.
I should learn to not ask two-part questions, I think, is the lesson.
The last thing I will say is that I know another question I get asked all the time when it comes to early decision has to do with the financial component. And I will say that we, especially this year, really took that seriously, took that to heart, and have started doing early financial estimates for families who are heavily considering early decision. We want to make sure families feel confident and comfortable in that decision, that it makes sense for them financially. And so that is something that we were able to offer starting this year for students that were considering that as an option.
Michaela, I think I certainly appreciate your expertise in kind of looking at the holistic process and your willingness to pull back that curtain a little bit. I hope that everyone has enjoyed the session today. Again, if you do have questions, I know that Michaela and I are absolutely happy to be resources and address any other lingering questions that you may have. So please feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to assist.
Thanks for being on our committee.
Yes. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye.